Hundreds of thousands of protesters have been blocking the streets of Myanmar cities. Taxis break down in the middle of the road, blocking traffic. Other vehicles drive slowly to create traffic jams so that government employees do not get to work. And everywhere, there are flags and placards, symbols of dissent against the military takeover of the country. On February 1st, the military in Myanmar took back power, making the civilian government irrelevant. Prominent leaders were detained and some were charged with crimes that seem out of place. Nobel Peace Prize winner Aung San Suu Kyi, the state councillor and the nation's democratic icon, has been charged with having flouted the country's Import-Export Regulation Act. She is accused of possession of unregistered walkie-talkies. And on February 16th, the military organized a virtual trial for Suu Kyi, a secret trial that even her lawyer wasn't aware of.
Aung San Suu Kyi was charged not only with one case, as we have already known, two cases. The first one is, as already mentioned, she was charged with Import-Export Act. And the second one is Disaster Management Act. Two cases against her.
While the earlier case against Aung San Suu Kyi under the Import-Export Act carried a possible sentence of a few years, under the Disaster Management Act, an accused can be held indefinitely without trial. President U Win Mint too has been charged with a case under the Disaster Management Act. The people in Myanmar are out on the streets, and unlike in the olden days under the military, this time they seem determined to continue resistance, whatever the cost. Myanmar had started a transition to democracy 10 years ago, after decades of military dictatorship. But all that seems to be over, with control back in the hands of the army. Yet there is something different in the air this time. People of Myanmar are finding common cause to resist the army coup. For now, there has not been much violence on the streets of Burmese towns and cities, but the situation remains tense as the military finds itself facing an adamant population demanding restoration of democracy. The level of passive resistance against its armed masters is unprecedented in this country. And this is a scenario that the military planners of the coup had probably not war-gamed for. For now, the demand for the release of Daw Aung San Suu Kyi is only increasing by the day. Daw Suu Kyi, as she is known, is the perfect blend of Western liberal views with Eastern sensibilities. Oxford-educated, highly intelligent, articulate and photogenic, she has always been a favorite of the international media. The frail-looking yet resolute and iron-willed lady who could take on the stocky army generals of the Burmese junta. Her loyalty to the people of Burma, her stance on democracy, and her solidarity with those imprisoned for demanding democracy earned her the respect of Burma and the world. Hers was the cause for democracy in the East. And she was and is the shining symbol of man's inherent, indelible right to be free and to live without persecution. Aung San Suu Kyi is the daughter of Myanmar's independence hero, General Aung San, who had worked to unite the various national groups of Burma to secure their independence from British rule. But on 19th of July 1947, 6 months before Burma was to become free, General Aung San was assassinated. His daughter Suu Kyi was just 2 at that time.
He was an idol for Burma. He was Burma's, how shall I put it, Mahatma Gandhi and Subhash Chandra Bose combined in one. He was a great freedom fighter and democrat, but he was also an army general and a great victor. And this combination was very powerful in Burma.
Burma became independent on 4th of January 1948, and 10 years later, in 1958, the army took control over the country for the first time. When democracy was restored, General Aung San's widow and Suu Kyi's mother gained prominence as a political figure in the newly formed Burmese government. In 1960, she was appointed Burmese ambassador to India, and the 15-year-old Suu Kyi came to live in Delhi with her mother.
Sue, as I call her, was in college with my sister Lady Sriram. Her mother became good friends of my parents. As a child, I would often go across to her mother's home and have khao sway. I loved khao sway. And in particular, something that her mother's cook used to make, black rice pudding. I was a small little fat boy, as Sue often teases me, and her mother would feed me almost like a little pig.
In 1962, there was another military coup in Burma, beginning the country's decline under military leadership. In 1964, Suu Kyi left India for Oxford University in the UK, where she studied philosophy, politics, and economics. It was here that she met Michael Eris, whom she married in 1972.
Sue was always a very idealistic woman. She had a very keen sense of idealism and a very firm, determined commitment to her principles. I remember a little story from Oxford in the 1970s, which shows you what sort of person she was and how she would respond to even the slightest hint of racial prejudice. I had been babysitting her son, Kim. Michael and Sue had returned after a movie they'd gone to see, and she'd said, let's have some cake and coffee before you go back. And while sitting, chatting, I told her a joke about the Chinese people, and unthinkingly, I called them chinks. And instantly she interrupted, and she said, that's not acceptable, Karan. Not even in humor can you do that. And I could tell from the seriousness of her tone that she really meant what she was saying. And that's, to me, an indication of her firm principles and her absolute rigid refusal to accept any form of racial prejudice, which is why her attitude to the Rohingyas today and her silence is so surprising. It goes so completely against the character that I knew as Sue.
In 1988, when Aung San Suu Kyi went back to Rangoon to look after her critically ill mother, her homeland was in the midst of a major political upheaval. Thousands of Burmese were taking to the streets every day, protesting against the military junta, demanding democratic reforms. And Suu Kyi, because of her pedigree, because of who her father had been and who her mother was propelled into leading the fight against military dictator General Ne Win.
While she was there, a sort of spontaneous student movement against the Ne Win regime took place. And the students came and asked if she would lend her support. She was, after all, Aung San's daughter, and Aung San, as I said, is an icon in Burma. And she decided, hesitantly at first, but increasingly with firm commitment, to support the students because they were fighting, struggling for the restoration of democracy and for the very ideals that she and more importantly her father had stood for. So it was really the fact that she was in Burma and the fact that this spontaneous student rising happened and that they approached her for leadership that led her to politics. Undoubtedly, she would have found some other way if this hadn't happened.
Organizing rallies and traveling around the country, calling for peaceful democratic reforms, Suu Kyi soon became the face of the agitation. She captured people's hearts with her non-violent stance. But in 1989, the government placed her under house arrest. In 1990, the military junta called for a multi-party election which gave a landslide victory to Aung San Suu Kyi's party, the National League for Democracy. The junta voided the results, refusing to hand over control to Suu Kyi and intensified repression. The future for democracy in Burma seemed bleak. It was at this time that the Nobel Committee decided that there was no better person than Aung San Suu Kyi to win the prize for peace in 1991.
She married an Englishman. They lived in London. And they felt that here was someone who was quote unquote one of us.
Sue's role as a young lady, separated from her husband and her children, kept under house arrest, had attracted enormous attention because of the very simple, low-profile way in which she went about it. She wasn't seeking publicity, she was fulfilling a commitment, an inner response to what she thought was a moral duty. And that also attracted huge attention. And she follows in the footsteps of people like Mahatma Gandhi and Nelson Mandela in committing herself to non-violence. And I think Burma was a country that the Nobel Peace Prize Committee felt had been ignored. It wanted to encourage this movement, and one way of encouraging the movement was to recognize it.
For the next 6 years, Suu Kyi stayed under house arrest. Released in July 1995, she still faced travel restrictions. But every word of hers and every move that Suu Kyi made was of immense importance to her country. When Suu Kyi was under house arrest in what used to be her mother's house by the river, passers-by would often hear strains of bark floating down from the house. And not allowed much access with the outside world, not even with her family, Suu Kyi remained in the center of Western media's interest. But it was a heartbreaking story in a sense, because a mother under house arrest and thousands of kilometers away, her 2 sons and husband in UK, not allowed to set foot into Burma. In 1997, Suu Kyi's husband of 25 years, Michael Harris, was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and he was again denied visa by the Burmese government. There were many appeals from the United States, from the then UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, and even Pope John Paul II, but they all fell on deaf ears. At that time, Suu Kyi was not under house arrest, and the junta, having denied Michael a visa, urged Aung San Suu Kyi to leave the country to attend to her sick husband. Suu Kyi refused the military's kind offer, knowing very well that that would mean exile, as she would never be allowed in again. Suu Kyi recorded a farewell video message for Michael. Then with great difficulty and stealth, it was smuggled out of Burma, only to reach England 2 days after Michael had passed away. In September 2000, Suu Kyi was placed back under house arrest. She was released after 19 months, but then again put back in. It seemed that the military rulers of Myanmar did not know what to do with her. This routine of in and out continued till 2009, when finally, after years of international diplomatic pressure, the Myanmar government announced that Aung San Suu Kyi might be released soon. The timing was crucial. Burma, now called Myanmar, was facing elections, but the junta had made sure that Suu Kyi was not allowed to run for elections. In October 2010, after 15 years of detention over a period of 21 years, Aung San Suu Kyi was released from house arrest. The world rejoiced. Her son Kim was allowed to visit her after a decade. The National League for Democracy, her party, finally regrouped and rejoined the political process. In 2013, for the first time in 24 years, Aung San Suu Kyi stepped out of the country as she embarked on a tour to meet friends who stood by her. In Delhi, Suu Kyi went to visit her old college.
Sue was always a very determined and tough person, very single-minded in what she wanted to do, and very rigid about her principles, which she would always stand by. There was also a huge inner beauty, and still is. She has a very definite style. She's a very petite, slim person, and she always has flowers, usually orchids, in her hair. And she has an engaging smile. She has a way of using her eyes to convey mischievous meaning to what she's saying. Her words are innocent, but her eyes convey that there are double senses. And that quality remained. And she had an engaging laugh which was there. But obviously the Sue I was meeting 20 years later was a much more serious, dedicated person because she'd been through so much.
For 2 years, Suu Kyi continued building up her party and drumming up international support for her country to return to the path of democracy. In 2015, her efforts bore fruit as Myanmar saw the first openly contested election in 25 years. Suu Kyi had reached out to her people, and they gave back the biggest mandate Myanmar had ever seen. Suu Kyi's NLD headed for a landslide victory. And although the constitution barred her from leading the government officially, she made it very clear that the power would ultimately rest with her.
If the NLD wins the elections and we form a government, I'm going to be the leader of that government, whether or not I'm the president.
How would you be leader of the government if you weren't president?
Why not? Did you have to be a president in order to lead a country?
This is a role akin to the role Sonia Gandhi played in India when Dr. Manmohan Singh was Prime Minister.
Not quite like that. So you wait and see and hope that we win the elections 100% so you can find out what I have in mind.
But the important thing is that if you are in a position to form a government, the leader of that government will be Aung San Suu Kyi, regardless of whether she's president or not.
Of course.
Suu Kyi's party, the NLD, won the required 2/3 number of seats contested in parliament to win a majority there. But this majority, this mandate, did not reflect the true picture, because there were 1 million Rohingyas in Rakhine who did not vote for her. And they did not vote because they are not allowed to vote. They are not citizens of Myanmar and they don't have the right to vote. In 2016, Suu Kyi was accused of failing to protect Myanmar's Rohingya Muslims during the persecution that followed the October militant attacks by ARSA when they killed 9 police officers. On 4th of September 2017, Yanghee Lee, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Myanmar, criticized Suu Kyi's response to the really grave situation in Rakhine, saying, "The de facto leader needs to step in. This is what we would expect from any government to protect everybody within their own jurisdiction." The global outrage flooded the internet, from Malala Yousafzai to Suu Kyi's old friend, Archbishop Desmond Tutu. The criticism grew and people raged.
If she is forthright, she will be thrown out not only by the army but by the large section of the people, because the anti-Muslim sentiment is so strong. I've seen it. You go through the streets of Rangoon, it's all there. Yangon, it's all there. So would you rather that she got thrown out and there was no one who could bring in democracy by persuasion, which is what many people I talk of my Myanmar friends say, that, you know, democracy can't be imposed. It has to be absorbed.
A global change.org petition asked the Nobel Institute to revoke the Nobel Peace Prize. The foundation had never received such a petition, and although it refused to do so, the anger kept growing.
She's a deeply thoughtful, understanding, intelligent lady who's well aware, far more than you and I, of the predicament she is within. And she's well aware that values that she's cherished, for which she is renowned internationally, look as if they're being compromised. But she's also aware that a certain compromise was inevitable given her position. That understanding of her predicament is her greatest strength, because it gives her the capacity to self-correct. Her greatest weakness is that she's not the absolute ruler of Burma. And her need to compromise is also, sadly, strengthening the army because it's weakening her.
On September 13th, Aung San Suu Kyi's office announced that she would not be attending the UN General Assembly debate being held to discuss the humanitarian crisis. A Myanmar government spokesman stated, perhaps she has more pressing matters to deal with.
Ultimately, our aim should be to create a world free from the displaced, the homeless, and the hopeless. A world of which each and every corner is a true sanctuary where the inhabitants will have the freedom and the capacity to live in peace.
Hello everyone, this is Rahul Kamal here. Hope you enjoyed this video. For the latest news and analysis, like and subscribe the India Today YouTube channel, and don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated.